Boston Bombing, the day America froze. Subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. Smoke, screams, blood on the pavement. The cheers that filled Boylston Street only moments earlier were gone, replaced by panic. People ran in every direction, tripping over fallen flags and scattered shoes. A woman's voice screamed for her child. A man, his leg torn and bleeding, tried to crawl toward the sidewalk. The smell of gunpowder and burned metal filled the air. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone shouted, "Another one's gonna blow!" And suddenly everyone ducked. A second explosion thundered through the street, shaking the windows and throwing a cloud of smoke over the crowd. For a few seconds, everything was still. Then came the cries, dozens of them, echoing through the smoke. Marathon medals lay twisted in the dirt. Cell phones buzzed on the ground beside their owners, unanswered. No one understood what had just happened. Was it an accident? A bomb? Why here, on Marathon Day, when families, students, and runners had gathered to celebrate life? As police officers and bystanders rushed to help the injured, the cameras kept rolling. America was watching, live. And as that second explosion faded into silence, one question filled every mind. Who did this? Just hours before the chaos, Boston was glowing with excitement. The morning sun shone over the Charles River, and college students from all over the city had gathered along the marathon route to cheer the runners. 20-year-old Ethan Miller, a sophomore at Boston University, stood near the finish line with his friend Sarah Lewis, both holding signs that said, "Run like you stole it." They laughed, sipping iced coffee, never imagining what the next few hours would bring. "It's wild how many people come out for this," Sarah said, waving at a runner dressed as Captain America, then smiled. "It's the biggest thing in Boston, remember? Patriots' Day. No classes, no stress, just fun." Nearby, a young man wearing a baseball cap and a black backpack stood alone. He looked calm, almost too calm, his eyes scanning the crowd before he slowly walked away. At the same time, two police officers at a nearby checkpoint noticed something odd. One of them pointed at a second man carrying a heavy bag that he set down near the spectators' area. "Looks suspicious," he murmured, but before they could move closer, their radios crackled with noise from another call. Ethan snapped a selfie with Sarah, the finish line behind them, the crowd cheering. "Okay, last picture before the runners come in," he said. Then, boom. The ground shook. A blast of heat and dust hit them like a wall. People screamed and fell. Ethan's ears rang. He couldn't hear Sarah. All he could see was smoke. He stumbled forward, coughing, eyes burning, searching for her. "Sarah! Sarah!" Another explosion ripped through the street. The screams grew louder. Sirens blared. The city's happiest day had turned into its darkest. And as chaos spread across Boston, somewhere in the crowd, the bombers quietly walked away. That was the moment everything changed. But how did Boston get there? Who were the men with the bags? And how did a peaceful college day turn into a national nightmare? The city was drowning in chaos. Ambulances, fire trucks, and police cruisers jammed Boylston Street. The air smelled of smoke, metal, and fear. Ethan's hands shook as he pressed his sweatshirt against a man's bleeding leg. He didn't even know who the man was, only that he was hurt and crying for help. "Stay with me, sir! Don't move!" Ethan shouted, but his voice trembled. His ears still rang from the explosions. The world sounded distant, muffled, like he was underwater. Then he saw Sarah. She was lying near a tiad, opled metal barrier, her hair covered in gray dust. He ran to her, slipping on shattered glass. "Sarah, can you hear me?" She groaned softly, her hand trembling. "Ethan, my leg, it hurts." He looked down and froze. Her jeans were torn, blood spreading fast. Ethan ripped off his own belt and tied it above her knee like a tourniquet, his hands slick with sweat and dirt. "It's okay. You're okay," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure if she was. All around them, people shouted names, looking for family, for friends. Helicopters hovered above. The once celebratory marathon banners now hung half-torn, waving sadly in the smoke. By nightfall, Boston was locked down. Streets were closed. Every hospital was full. On TV, news anchors' voices were grim. 2 explosions struck near the Boston Marathon finish line today. At the Boston Police Headquarters, officers crowded around screens replaying surveillance footage. They rewound the same few seconds over and over, the moments before the blasts. "Zoom in on that guy," said Detective Laura Higgins, pointing at a figure wearing a black backpack near the first explosion site. The man looked calm, watching the crowd. Then he turned away just before the bomb went off. They ran facial recognition, but nothing came up. No ID, no record, just a face lost in the crowd. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in the hospital waiting room, his hoodie stained with Sarah's blood. His phone buzzed non-stop, texts from friends, family, news alerts, but he couldn't bring himself to read them. The faces around him were blank, pale, shocked. A nurse finally appeared. "You're the friend of Sarah Lewis?" Ethan jumped up. "Yes. How is she?" "She's stable," the nurse said softly. "She'll need surgery, but she's alive. You saved her." Ethan felt relief wash over him, but it didn't last long. On the TV above the waiting room, a reporter spoke urgently. Authorities now confirm the explosions were caused by homemade pressure cooker bombs likely hidden in backpacks. Ethan froze. Backpacks. He remembered the man near them, the one who looked calm, watching everything. He could still see his face. At FBI headquarters, investigators connected clues piece by piece. Pressure cookers, ball bearings, shrapnel, nails. This wasn't random. It was planned. "We're dealing with people who know what they're doing," said one agent, "and they're still out there." As Boston slept in fear, Ethan couldn't. He sat by Sarah's bedside, her breathing slow and steady, and stared out the window at the city lights fading in the mist. The marathon had ended hours ago, but for Boston, the nightmare was just beginning. Somewhere out there, the bombers were watching the news too, and one of them whispered, "They'll never find us." Morning came, but Boston didn't wake up. The city was silent, stores closed, buses parked, and streets eerily empty. Police sirens echoed in the distance, bouncing off cold concrete walls. Every television screen flashed the same headline: "Suspects identified, Tamerlan and Johar Tsarnaev." Ethan sat frozen in front of the screen, his eyes wide. The faces looked familiar. The younger one, Johar, was the man he remembered from the crowd, the calm one with the backpack. His stomach twisted. "Sarah," he whispered, turning to her hospital bed. "That's him. That's the guy." Across the city, thousands of officers swarmed the suburbs. SWAT teams moved door to door, armored trucks blocking intersections. Helicopters circled overhead as police scanners buzzed with chatter. The order was simple: find the Tsarnaev brothers, alive or dead. That night, in a quiet neighborhood in Watertown, the silence broke. A gunshot, then another. Neighbors peeked from windows as chaos exploded on the street. Police cars screeched to a halt. Officers jumped out, taking cover behind doors. Bullets tore through the night air. Tamerlan Tsarnaev fired wildly, shouting in panic as Johar threw small explosives toward the officers. The air filled with smoke, gunfire, and flashing lights. One officer fell. Another returned fire. The brothers' car engine roared. "Freeze! Drop the weapon!" an officer yelled. Tamerlan didn't stop. He charged forward, and in seconds the fight was over. Tamerlan was down, motionless, but Dzhokhar escaped. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and burned rubber. By dawn, Boston was a city under siege. Roads closed, public transit halted, families locked their doors. A broadcast voice echoed across radios and TVs. "Stay inside, do not open your doors. The suspect is armed and dangerous." The city felt frozen in time, like the whole world was holding its breath. Ethan stared out the hospital window, watching police cruisers race by. "How can one city feel so quiet, yet so scared?" he murmured. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, as evening set in, a man in a small backyard in Watertown noticed something strange, blood dripping down the side of his boat. He called the police. Within minutes, dozens of officers surrounded the property. They moved slowly, weapons ready. A spotlight cut through the darkness, landing on the white boat. Inside, hidden under a tarp, was Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, weak, bleeding, and trembling. A voice through the megaphone shouted, "Come out with your hands up!" No response. Then, after a long silence, a faint rustle. The tarp moved, a shadow rose. Dzhokhar climbed out slowly, his hands raised. The crowd watching from their windows began to cheer and cry. Boston had been frozen for days, but now it felt like the city could breathe again. Later that night, Ethan sat beside Sarah, holding her hand as the TV showed live footage of the suspect's capture. The words on the screen read, "Suspect in custody, Boston strong." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks. "It's finally over," she whispered. Ethan nodded, but his eyes stayed on the screen. "Yeah, but we'll never forget." Outside, the streets slowly came back to life. People gathered, lighting candles, holding flags, whispering prayers. Boston had been wounded, but it hadn't been broken. That day, the world watched as a city stood tall in the face of fear. The Boston bombing. The day America froze.